Hello, everyone, and welcome at apidays Interface, the third edition, our only annual online conference for the whole apidays community. We have a lot of people from all around the world who cannot join every time in-person events. So we decided 3 years ago, it was COVID time also, but we decided to have an online event where everyone can actually attend. We can also have speakers that are really busy and can't travel a lot, but now it's online. They can actually speak. So we're really glad to open the conferences to open the conference this year, Interface by API Days. And the theme this year will be API for smart economy. So you've probably heard about APIs over the last 20 years, but in the last recent month, we had a lot of topics about artificial intelligence, large language models, like how you can multiply the user experience by 10x, 100x, by making your application smart, your company smart, your process smarter, your user experience smarter with all this new technology and APIs. And this is what we will talk about to really turn your organization into an exponential organization, delivering exponential value. We hope with a minimum effort, but a smart effort, right? So that will be the goal. That will be the goal we will talk about. And I will just remind you, for people who were the first-time attendees of an API Day conference, the goal of API Days conferences is really to connect the humans behind APIs, behind the interface. We do that in person most of the time, but exceptionally for API Days interface, we do that virtually for our annual online event. So you're here, you are on the platform, you can chat with people, you can ask questions to speakers, you can discuss on Twitter. That's a moment where we can learn, we can share ideas and connect with each other. So it's really the goal of API Days conferences. But as I told you, we do that virtually only at API Days interface, but we have a lot of in-person events all around the world, almost every month of the year. We had New York recently, we have London coming in September, we have Paris, our main event, with 3,000 people in December. But we had also some more community and regional events like Helsinki in North, Middle East in Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, or Australia. So whatever the world you are, we're really glad to host you, to have you at an API Days conference. And if you want to run your own API Days conference, you can always reach us. We may need your help to soft land API conferences in your area. API Days, it's 11 years of existence. We're really promoting the API mindset since 2012. More than 55 events, almost all the sponsors, all the industry players have been sponsor and supporter of API Days so far. It's a huge community of past attendees, of online community members, and also a large community of speakers, right? That all the thought leaders of the space have been at some point speaker at API Days conference. To make some noise about the event and recognize each other who is actually attending, you can use Twitter with the hashtag API Days Interface. And if you mention us at API Days Global, we will be glad to retweet you, like your tweets, and give more visibility about what you have to share. API Days is not only events. So we do events, conferences, workshops, meetups, but we also help companies on the consulting side and hiring API jobs, like hiring API product managers or hiring API architects, API developers. With a lot of people in our community actually want to join top API companies. We do a lot of research with white papers, industry research, API landscapes. We do classes, trainings, and we also provide content. So API Days is not only just a conference; it's a whole community and practice. Two initiatives I really wanted to talk about. The first one is women in APIs. Really, the goal, in tech, we don't have enough gender diversity. And so this is why 4 years ago, we started an initiative to foster diversity and talent in the API community. So Women APIs is a network helping people being seen and heard, especially for women, but everyone is invited. But we focus on more female and women engineers, developers, business analysts in the API space. And today it's approximately over 200 members in 40 countries. We do quarterly meetups, which are quite well attended. We have 20 mentors that can really help other female of the community to be seen and heard. And we have already 40 people who graduated for our Get Speaking program, our program to coach female to apply to conferences and speak at conferences. The second initiative I wanted to talk about is the Sustainable Digital Challenge. You all know the constraints we have on carbon footprint and natural resource consumption. So the IT industry has something to do and has something to say and be part of that huge reduction. So every year we do a Sustainable Digital Challenge. It's a 3-month program that is free to attend, where we do workshops on reducing the carbon footprint of the user experience and design, of the code, of the architecture, and the hardware. So companies can come and completely rethink their application or their digital program according to eco-design principles. So I invite you to go there. We already did 3 editions. It will be the 4th edition this year, and it's organized with our partner greenet.io. Last but not least, an initiative I wanted to talk about is API Scene. It's a media platform for API articles, API news, API point of views, visionary leaders about API management, API security, API design. So a lot of our speakers actually write in API Scene, so don't hesitate to go on apicene.io or to reach us to write and being recognized as an API thought leader on API Scene media platform. Okay, so what do we have for today for API for Smart Economy, embedding AI to deliver smart APIs and turn into an exponential organization? So what do we have today about the program? We will start with 2 keynotes, 1 fireside chat and 1 keynote actually. And we'll have 3 tracks. 1 track will be LLM, AI, and APIs. 1 track will be the new API tech stack, like what are the new tools, the new open source tooling, what are the new practice to power your APIs and API management capabilities. And the 3rd track on API security, which will be powered by our partner, APISec University. For tomorrow, we will still have some keynotes, mostly on eco-design and APIs, but then we'll have 1 track mostly on API business and APIs as a product and latest API trends, and another track on API lifecycle, design, and governance. All this event is supported by our sponsors that makes this event possible. The first one and main one sponsor for this event is Influx Data. They will have speakers during the event. They will have a workshop. So if you're interested about how to make better analytics for your APIs and how to store better data, you can go look at their talk or their workshops. We also have some bronze community sponsors like Kong, Blubber, Traffic Labs. So if you're interested about API, microservice, service message capabilities, developer portals, and monetization, or API security and testing, you can Kong, Blubber, and Traffic Labs can be great companies to talk to. But it's time to start. And we will start this first fireside chat and keynote with two sessions. The first one will be a fireside chat with Eric Newcomer about really understanding the latest trend on API management industry, some debates. Don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll be glad to include them in the discussion. And the second one will be an announcement about the API Green Score, how to reduce the environmental impact of your APIs with Yannick Tremblais, which is IT Innovation Manager at Groupe Rocher, and they did a great job on evaluating the impact of your APIs on the environment and how you can actually monitor and reduce it. So yeah, we'll be glad to talk about that. But it's time to start with this fireside chat with Eric. So I'll invite Eric on stage. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really glad to have you. You 2 weeks ago, you made 3 weeks ago, I think, a nice article about on the news stack about the latest API Days conferences you attended in New York, and yes, we had some discussion about the latest trend, and yes, we said we should talk about the what's happening in this industry, and with your overview, your experience on the field, you can really help people navigate into that industry. So maybe
Thanks. Really happy to be here. I've been involved in one way or another with APIs now. I'm just checking. It's looking like about 20 years since I got started with the original SOAP spec back at W3C. I was on the Web Services Architecture Committee for a while. We wrote an architecture spec, but we had so much controversy. Even the beginning when the SOAP spec was submitted, we had this huge debate between those who were doing document-oriented RESTful services and those who wanted to do RPC type SOAP services. And so we pushed on SOAP for many years, and it looked like it was going down the proprietary route with the vendors in control, and Java vendors were putting it into Java EE and Microsoft was putting it into .NET. So you were producing web services from these proprietary tools instead of having them be standards themselves. And I talked to Tim Berners-Lee about this once at one of the W3C events, and he sponsored a workshop where we had it out across the entire community, web services versus REST. And as we know now, REST has really succeeded and become the ubiquitous standard, and web services and SOAP and WSDL are kind of legacy. And it's really fascinating to see where it's going to go from here. I think the standardization is really good for the industry, and the fact that APIs have a standard base in REST and other protocols now is leading to their ubiquitous adoption. We see them everywhere. I learned a lot at the last API Days conference. I love these conferences. And among the things, that was very obvious was the huge uptake of APIs across the board, internally in companies. I had used them. I was the first one to put a RESTful service in production at Credit Suisse when I was there. I championed them at Citi when I was there. And at WSO2, most recently, I had a chance to provide some technology leadership and vision to the API area for that company. And it's just fascinating to see how things are going and where they're going to go from here, from that kind of long ago beginning. One other just brief thing to add for you. The whole idea of the gateway started back in the web services days with Data Power Appliance. This was for WS security. And now, of course, it's expanded to not just to use web services, but REST, and not just security, but rate limiting and throttling and monetization. And all of these things were added to it, and it became so heavyweight, trying to keep up with all the use and all the different applications and all the protocols and all the things that people need to do with APIs, that now we're seeing the trend toward, as we talked about in the last API Days, and it was in the article, commoditization of the gateway and the disaggregation of the functions the gateway used to provide. And we're seeing a lot of innovation with small vendors coming up, specializing in different areas of the stack now.
Yeah, it's true. I've been in this industry only for 10 years, so not have the same experience as you. But 10 years ago, we were discussing about the gateway a lot, like what the size of the gateway, what the gateway should do. It should be just a path through, or do we still have some business logic that still needs to go through the gateway? We were coming back from the ESBs. The gateway was really a topic, and now it seems like it's a commodity. Now the question is more the management aspect, more the analytics, the governance. The gateway is a commodity. Many open source gateways have been around. So yeah, how did you see that trend coming?
One of the most interesting things when I was talking with some of the vendors at the last conference, they're all talking about raising up the visibility of what's going on with APIs to the business level. And this is very, very important because companies investing a lot in APIs, how do they know their investments are returning the value that they want? I'll give you a very simple example. My son is actually working on API integration for an insurance company. And he told me, Dad, some of these third-party APIs are very easy to consume. I get them into my application, no problem. I get support. I have questions. There's people there. They make it easy. Other companies, they just kind of throw something out there. They don't know what it is. There's no support. I can't get it to work. So it's against the wishes or the interests of the company to put out something that can't be easily consumed. So companies have to pay attention to this. And a lot of the new analytics tools and the new mocking and testing tools are really working at this level to try to make a good user experience. They can tell you how many clicks does it take to integrate an API with your application? What was the journey on that website? What's the feedback? What's the usage? How's the time from getting it there to getting it used? How can you monetize it? What's the best strategy if you're going to charge for it in bulk or by micro payments? This is the kind of thing that companies really need as they invest more and more in APIs.
So is it because the business has been more involved into API management, let's say, or API strategies, that
Absolutely.
before it was just an architect discussion, but now the
Absolutely.
business is involved?
Initially, when we were working on this back in my days in financial services, we were doing it primarily for integration internally. We were creating services as the best way to integrate different applications. And then pretty soon, even when I was at Citi, we started to push APIs out for public consumption, and became in the banking industry. And this is certainly an area relative to regulation and verticalization that there's a lot of work going on in. But the banks started to understand that they could put APIs out and start to do business with APIs and get business that way. And the business people started to pay attention and say, look, here's another area that's strategic for us because it can bring in money. Now, how do we make sure that we're bringing the right amount of money? How do we make sure we're succeeding in this ecosystem? And it's not as easy as just putting an API out there and hoping somebody will consume it. You can't just say, hey, I put it there, people will come. No, you need to really pay a lot of attention.
Yeah, and totally understand. But the open source, let's say, aspect of it have been really important into this commoditization, into this, like, say, large spread of API gateways. Then on the API management practice on top. So you've been on the managing the program side, with your different at Credit Suisse or Boeing and others. You've been on the vendor side, at WSO2, who is the leader open source management platform. I think the first open source management, one of the first was, it was I just forgot the name, but it was Alcatel. I think they had also something in 2006 or something like that. Maybe
I can't remember either.
Yeah,
so WSO2 was kind of in the middle with the open source API. They started out as I did with web services. That was their original open source web services toolkits. They started 17 years ago in that market and pivoted to API management maybe 8-10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, and then we see there were some pioneers on open source, and then there are some new players like recent, Tyke, Gravity, Kong. There is also a 3Scale, Red Hat also there. So there is this really new trend, and all these new players have actually democratized, let's say, the gateway, the portal, the analytics. So how, to your mind, open source has been a key player into this democratization?
What's really going on now is the move to the cloud is shaking things up. So none of the new open source gateways are based in the cloud. And we're seeing a convergence on the Envoy open source project for Kubernetes as Kubernetes becomes the de facto deployment architecture. So a lot of the vendors you just mentioned are working in that area. And I think this is the big trend to watch, is the convergence of new open source development of API gateways for the cloud converging on Envoy and Kubernetes. And you'll also at the same time have the cloud provider vendors with their own API gateways. And we're going to see an interesting, I guess you could say, maybe struggle or competition in the industry between the API gateways that are provided by the cloud vendors and the API gateways based on the Envoy open source project sponsored by CNCF. Because you have, on the one hand, something tuned specifically for one of the cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, even Oracle coming up. On the other hand, you have the need of multi-cloud capabilities based on the standards such as the Envoy proxy. So this is where open source is coming in, not right now, I think, most prominently.
Yeah, and also there's maybe the cost associated with that. Of course, the cloud, there is also the fact that, but with open source, you need to know how to manage it. You need to learn the practice. It's not hosted. So this is also where maybe the practice has evolved. At least at the PLS conferences, we've seen so many new architects being promoted, API product managers or developers or business analysts, like being in charge of a whole program. So yes, we definitely have seen.
Yeah, you see recruiting ads in LinkedIn for API project leaders, API managers. Absolutely, it's become a whole business, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these trends. And open source remains a foundational part of it. But as you see, also the open source vendors provide managed services. They host it for you in the cloud or on-prem, and they provide some income that way. Or you have the open core vendors with the open source, and they add the enterprise features. And these things are going to continue. But I think the successful vendors are going to be the ones who find the right niche of a problem area that's not solved or solved well in the new world of APIs being a business with product managers and project managers, and APIs becoming products with ROI associated with them. How do you raise this up from speeds and feeds and your load balancing and rating and security policy enforcement up to how well is that API doing as a product? How can we find that out? And these are the kinds of things where if you have an open source base, someone needs to start to add these on top for making more, commercializing those things.
So so if we go back the last 20 years, but so ESBs, web services, then REST, JSON, like new way to build and think APIs, like this. The business get involved the last 10 years, so it moves from just a technical architect discussion to a more, let's say, broader business discussion. Then open source comes to the game to democratize it even better. Okay, so now we have this more mature API management industry where the gateway is a commodity. But you mentioned the term like API security, and it's true that the 2.5 years of COVID have obliged companies to open APIs in the wild, enable remote work, connect with each other. But they've done that, in a way that was really not governed. Sometimes it was in a hurry. We have all these shadow APIs out there. So, and we've seen really last year the frenziness of API security. So, to your mind, to your point of view, like, does API security is now really a standalone product that needs standalone tools because the API management industry is not ready yet? Or no, it's just like a trend, and API management vendors, classic vendors, will actually get that into their realm?
It's an interesting area. There's a lot of different aspects of API security, and different vendors tend to focus on different aspects. Something I liked a lot about the last conference, we had a presentation from Mark O'Neill at Gartner, who went over the basic process of API security. So like the OWASP framework, which was also presented, the OWASP API Security Top 10 was discussed at the last conference, which was also very interesting. I did another article about that, how authorization remains the biggest risk for API security. But the process of it, as most security frameworks will start out with, will give you an idea of what you need to do to be secure with your APIs. And then you can figure out which tools fit into that process the best way. And it starts by discovering what you have. Going back to my city experience, I was responsible for API security for bot detection for a while. And sometimes we would only find out that we had an attack on an API because somebody had put an API in production without telling us. So we didn't even, and then we would study what are all the APIs, and we had to manual exercise to try to figure out what were all the APIs that were out there, because nobody knew. There was no central point of control. So we see a lot of API security vendors starting with this, and this is the first point of guidance on the OWASP and the Mark O'Neill's process for API security. Find out what you have, and then go through that inventory and check the different aspects of security. There's companies that are focused on the payload security and validating the payload. There's companies that are focused on penetration testing and preventing some break-ins. There's those that are focused on authorization. It's a very important area that's not been solved. Authentication is pretty well solved. You can have an ID for the API. That's ground zero. That's basic blocking and tackling. You need that. But then with the ID, to get the right roles, permissions, and policies associated with it, so that you make sure whoever gets in, if they break in through that API ID, they can't access sensitive data with those credentials. So it's kind of a list, and some companies are focused on authorization, some are focused on the payload validation, some are focused on encryption, some are focused on authentication. And so it's kind of a long story in a way, because you have a long checklist to make sure everything is secure, and you have different vendors providing different parts of that stack. And this is, I think, in general, what's going on with the new trend is customers are going to have to evaluate the different vendors against the requirements that they have. And with something like API security, you really have to start with the process and all the vulnerabilities that need to be protected against, and figure out which vendors offer which protection.
But that may lead to a lot of fragmentation, too many tools, too many companies. So vendors will acquire and merge them with their product, don't you think?
Yeah, we're seeing it already. We're seeing many of this, like Okta's acquired a lot, Thales has acquired a lot of companies. There's another API security company that's been trying to acquire everything so they can provide the full solution, including governance, which is another big area I didn't mention. So I think we are seeing this for sure. Classic case, Okta and Auth0, of course, very well known, but there are others. SailPoint, I think, was acquired recently. So yeah, absolutely what's happening.
This is why the evaluation of startups is maybe crazy in that space, because investors know there will be acquisitions. So maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Let's do it. Let's do one, Mehdi.
Yeah.
Let's do a startup.
The business model is to sell the company, not to sell products. So, so again, security. Thank you for sharing your point of view. We see some question in the chat about architecture. It's true that there is another trend we see in the industry. It's like the event-driven architecture.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. One of the things I did at Citi was I redesigned the payment processing system from batch-based to event-based. The management called this the non-batch option, which I thought was kind of a funny way to put it. But payment systems still are largely batch-oriented, although it is changing. And I have had heard a very interesting talk from someone at Tesla about how they use events to manage the telemetry from the cars and analyze all the information on the map and from the charging stations to direct people to the right charging stations at the right time. And they put a chain of events together to do this. There's another case study at Walmart that showed how they changed an RPC-based architecture, which was creating a lot of bottlenecks and performance issues, and solved that by an event-based architecture that brought the inventory up asynchronously into a pool where it could be checked very easily instead of having to do RPC calls to check inventory for all the items. So I think we're seeing a big trend. We're seeing a lot of vendors coming out in the event-driven area. Vendors who have been there for a long time are starting to expose their capabilities more as APIs. We have the async API spec that's come out that's been very helpful to standardize this. Webhooks, server-side events, all of these things are coming out as better ways and better alternatives to do some of the types of activities. They're not going to replace the request response, but they're going to provide a good alternative for some use cases where it's better served. So this is a great trend as well. It's going to cause some challenges for the companies that are doing gateways and management and security, because they have to be multi-protocol and they have to understand events and they have to put these things together. And some of the vendors are starting to do that, but this is very, very important trend too.
But is it because also of the business asking for more real time or for more performance, or like you were mentioning Tesla? Recently, I wanted to connect my bank to another accounting platform, and they were saying, the connection works, but you will have only the results at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning and all the receipt and everything. So that's why I connected now.
Yeah, banks are still very batch oriented, unfortunately, and that's difficult to change those systems to online. The batch systems have been in place a long time. They're very reliable. Event processing is an alternative for that, which I hope they're going to look into more and more, but I think that's going to take some time.
But I think the customer demand, now with many new digital players, we want things real time. It's normal to have things real time.
I have the feeling that API trend, the API standardization, is really contributing to the advancement of society in a way. I mean, I've gone onto government websites. Recently I got a jury duty notice, and I went onto the government website, and they let me do everything online now to respond to this. And a few years ago, that was not the case. So I do see more and more things moving online, even with government. I see banks becoming better about it, many companies becoming better about it. And I'm a little surprised in some cases how quickly they're able to do it. But I think a lot of it has to do with the API standardization layer and the abstraction layer that APIs provide for being able to do things like this. So yeah, I think the change is starting to accelerate, and you're seeing some banks that are really out ahead of others. I could name Capital One. I'm a Capital One customer, and their credit card processing, you go online to a shopping site and they find all the discount coupons for you automatically and enter it. Other credit cards companies are not doing that, but they know they need to catch up. So I think we're going to see this.
So we have a question from Olga about it's a question more about RPC, gRPC, SOAP versus REST, whatever the thing. But let's say now we have so we had a lot of SOAP services. REST came into the game, making it more easy and simpler and lightweight. But now we see like we have seen GraphQL coming, for really mobile development and backend for front end. We've seen also RPC and gRPC, for high performance services and microservices. Also, so how do you see things coming? Will we stay with a different, let's say, philosophy, protocols, architectural styles, and we will just use the best one for the best use? Or do you see like some will fade, like maybe the SOAP will completely fade? I don't know, like how do you see that protocol and style competition?
I think SOAP is legacy being replaced over time. Some people are still using it. Of course, things get in production, they get used for a long time. REST, I don't think is going away anytime soon. I think it's still the dominant form of APIs, maybe 80-85%. I've heard. My mental model about this, I talked years ago with Adrian Cockcroft, who was doing the migration of Netflix from on-prem Java EE monolith to microservices. And I asked him what was his programming model at one point, and he said his idea was they had a kind of a coarse-grained interface into the microservice that was HTTP based. But once they got into the microservice, when they were inside of their own environment, they were using RPCs for finer-grained APIs. So you have kind of this concept of a unit of work that might be represented by a RESTful API. And within that unit of work, you may have need for other calls, other invocations of other services, and those are probably going to be more easily done with RPCs. Generally, I think you're right. It's the right solution for the right requirement. You can't say one size, one ring is going to fit all use cases. And I think there's a place for RPC, there's a place for REST. Historically, the way I look at this, REST came up emerged as HTTP did as a wide area network protocol. If you look at the original REST thesis by Roy Fielding, he talks very specifically about why they engineered HTTP to be suitable for wide area networks of wide area World Wide Web. And they took out something that's essential for the RPC mechanism, which is a shared session state, on purpose for this kind of scalability. RPC, on the other hand, is very intuitive, very easy to use, and it's good for a local area network environment. So I kind of also have this mental model of, REST is decoupled, stateless, scalable for a wide area network of the World Wide Web, and that's why it's been so successful. And RPC tends to be a little more restricted for its use in that kind of broad context, but it can be very useful in a local area network. I know these are kind of very oversimplifications, but I think it's illustrative of the point that the right protocol should be used for the right job.
So it's really about like the size. Do you want things large scale, a large use versus like something will we stay quite local in terms of usage rates? But sometimes we don't know with these open and public APIs, actually, we don't something that is really local and should be only used internally, maybe actually extremely useful and asked by a business externally. So this is why we may have seen like some issues where we had to put things out that were not ready to be out.
And again, this is why it's so important to get these analytics, to get these the feedback tools, to get all of these items visible at that level of have we done the right thing with the right protocols for the right application? How can we tell what's the feedback, what's the observability, what's the monitoring, what's the analytics that tells me I've made the right choice?
Yeah, but let's say it can contradict at some point, the Jeff Bezos mandate, you should open APIs to the external world as if developer would use it without exception,
that was a fascinating mandate. I worked for a long time with Credit Suisse when I was CTO at Iona, and then at Credit Suisse after Iona was acquired. One of the largest SOA installations in the world. Gartner used it as their case study for SOA. And the principles of SOA are what's behind microservices as well. It's kind of specialization of it, how you can compose things, break things up, make things reusable, manageable, and so on. And Jeff Bezos mandated that for Amazon, and it's worked out really well for them. And I credit that decision as part of the trend for microservices. I think Netflix experience with it is the other part, where the Netflix was in particular saying, I need to break my problem up so that if I have a failure, it only hits this one area of the problem. and I need to scale up more easily and be more flexible and automated and all these other benefits. But have just Jeff Bezos said that, I think the original reason, if I understand it, he said it was he's trying to get his team to be more productive. He did this study, the pizza team study, that showed teams of 12 or more became less productive because you spent all the time communicating. If you break the problem up with strongly governed interfaces and delegate all the responsibility to a service to a small team, they can get it done quickly. And you have to have a lot of governance in place for this to make sure that the interfaces don't get changed in a way that breaks somebody else. But if you can set that up, and it's what they've done, it's very fascinating because that team of 12 is responsible for everything from design through to production. They wear beepers if there's a problem. I talked with somebody who did development for the Amazon website, and he said, yeah, we had the beepers. If something went wrong with the click now to pay button microservice, they called us and we had to go in. So it's a fascinating model. I think the reason for it primarily is productivity, getting the small teams to be able to work together and plug the results together seamlessly with the APIs. But it's hard to do, especially in a company where I was working. It was used to having monolithic development teams working on a bigger problem.
Yeah, I often say Jeff Bezos has been one of the main API evangelists. If it was not, I think it was not expecting that to happen. The second one is Steve Jobs with the mobile, the app stores. Like where now with mobile you are obliged to have APIs to connect to the mobile.
Oh yeah, that changed everything.
Yeah, and the third one is Kinlane, the API evangelist with all this content. But this is for me the three top API evangelists, that have pushed many businesses in the world to adopt APIs, not just to adapt to APIs, but to really adopt APIs and the mindset behind that. So, talking about adoption, there's another trend that we're seeing is that you mentioned at the beginning of the chat that actually the business is more involved into the topic, like the KPIs for APIs sometimes, as John Mercer used to mention this. And so there, on one side, there's the lack of developers. On the other side, the business wants to be involved, and this is where we've really seen this no code or low code at least, but mostly no code trend, of course powered by APIs. But it seems now we ask businesses and IT teams to provide APIs in a classic way for developers, but we also ask them to give like widgets or plugins or no code integrations to actually enable the business to stop shadow IT, to stop doing like a software on hidden software, but actually stay in the realm of IT, but still being able to use the software. So how do you see this no code and the citizen developer, let's say, explosion?
Oh gosh, I think it still has to be something that's coordinated with IT, because there's always this demarcation line between what you can do with no code and low code tools and what you cannot do because of the complexity of the problem. I think people look at the no-code tools, look at the power of assembling with drag and drop and plug and play blocks and pre-built APIs and pre-built connectors and adapters, and that's can provide a lot of value and a lot of help in a productivity. But it gets to a certain point where you have maybe a problem that's not solvable this way, and you have to go and get some code done by a developer. Now all of a sudden you're saying, hey, I've done this over here, why isn't it working? And it becomes a problem. But if you had done this development together between shadow IT people and IT, I think this really points to the fact that those barriers need to be broken down. The reason shadow IT often exists in the first place is because of this traditional separation of duties between IT and the business. Business creates the requirements, throws them over to IT. IT brings them back, and business says, what the hell is this? I'm oversimplifying, but this often happens that there's not enough communication between the two. And I think if low-code tools are going to succeed, that's the big problem that has to be solved. And I think low-code tools can play a role, and we're seeing more and more of them.
So we have some question about like what do we say by no code? Like the goal is, I don't know if you know application like Zapier, who are able to connect APIs with each other. Airtable, who is able to give a database, simple kind of database as for non-developers to use. And so you will be able to connect maybe your email provider, with your Dropbox, with your photo provider, or with your CRM, or with your spreadsheet, and you will be able to mix and make them discuss with each other to build full business application without the need of coding, because the software as a service have APIs that can connect with each other and exchange data in a way that you don't need to even do code, but just use like these 3, 4, 5 no-code tools or no-code platforms that connect with each other by APIs, and then you're able to have a full business process as a service without the need of coding. So this is what we talk about really the no-code era. Just to answer to the question in the chat. But Eric, do you see like businesses like really getting let's say business people to be no coder? I don't know how to call them, but like, do you see really a huge trend? I've seen, like, for example, trainings, like 3 months training to build application with no code and stuff. But do you see that really a large trend, or it's just like it's just how do you say that, on some teams in some companies?
Well, I think it's a definite trend, and it comes out of the lack of developer skills. We've been talking about the proliferation and the growth of APIs across all aspects of the industry, and that requires developers. And when we're talking about moving to the cloud and doing a lot of the work there, now you've got a specialized skill set that's required. It's in very short supply. And shadow IT comes up in part because the business has a lot of urgent need to compete on certain fronts, and they can't get enough work from the IT department, they feel, to get it done. So they sponsor their own groups to do things, and I think no code fits in there. I've seen also people in the business side doing AI work and ML work that the IT department hasn't been able to pick up. And I think it has to be put in the context of what somebody's trying to achieve. If they have a business need for a certain type of application, let's say mobile app or a web app, and they find a no-code tool that can really help prototype and help design it effectively to meet the business needs, that's a good use of it. But there'll be other cases where it's maybe not so clear. If someone says, well, I have a workload that can't get done, let's just get a no-code tool and chop away at this workload. You don't really know if that no-code tool is applicable to what part of the workload if you're just saying, I need to bring it in for productivity. So I think a lot of companies are adding no-code capability to their tools for the particular problems space that they're in to help with the productivity. So I think underlying this whole thing is the need for better productivity, better levels of abstraction for developers to work. And we're seeing this huge, with ChatGPT, right? The developers are getting ChatGPT to do a bunch of their work. And so I think it's more all about productivity and getting the job done for the business than it is about low code per se. Low code is a part of that solution, not the solution only by itself.
Yeah, no code is just one more tool in the toolbox to help organization, adopt digital transformation. But actually, for the last 5 minutes we have, this is actually maybe what I call the body trend. So you mentioned ChatGPT, LLMs, artificial intelligence as a way to enable the business and developers to do more, or even business people to do more. But a lot of companies are afraid about, like, of course, the capability, and they don't want to miss it, but they're also afraid about their APIs to connect with these LLMs and with, for example, ChatGPT. So ChatGPT has this plugin capability where you can actually connect your APIs to ChatGPT, so you can ask things to to ChatGPT that will interact with your APIs, like booking a hotel or sending whatever email or calendar things or whatever to your teams. But like, what advice you would give to companies about like getting your API interfaced into LLMs?
Oh gosh, it's a huge area, and I'm not very familiar with it. One of the things I could probably say is if you're doing natural language processing already with some kind of AI or ML toolkit, consider moving that to ChatGPT, because that's its real strength. It gets the large language models, and it understands the relationship of words to each other and can answer questions based on understanding a conversation of words, but it's mostly processing words. So NLP would be the first place to look for ChatGPT to be applied in the business. But I hear also a lot of my colleagues have successfully used it for coding assignments, creating database schemas, creating database queries, creating GUIs, all these kinds of things. So I think also in the development area, it can be very helpful. In terms of generally what you do with your own data set and ChatGPT and the APIs, that's going to depend on your data. If you're going to successfully train a model, you need a lot of data. I think ChatGPT used trillions of words, synonyms, I forget what they call them, tokens, to train it. And you may have a big enough data set in your company to take advantage of training a model to have become interactive through ChatGPT. And if so, then you can probably get a lot of good benefits there as well across that utilization of that data set. But that's kind of case by case, and I wouldn't have much, more specific advice than that.
Yeah, it's really hard. Things are moving every day, but it's true that if you share your APIs, if you connect your APIs to LLMs, there will be, of course, security concerns, sometimes confidentiality concerns about what stays in or out. There's compliance concerns, like where the LLM is hosted, if it's in the US or in Europe or in another country. Are you allowed your data to be hosted in this area? So the privacy concerns and data protection. So they're really, because we see some questions like flowing in the chat about that. So this is why I'm mentioning it. But but API management needs to adapt to this new LLM era, right?
Absolutely, and this is a two-way street. You need APIs into ChatGPT and the data, and you need ChatGPT tools need APIs to get data. So this again is going to drive up the use of APIs considerably and feed into a lot of these trends we've been talking about all morning about how to get the value out of your APIs, out of your data, and how do you know what value you're getting. And this is the area I see most interesting in the trends going on today.
Yeah, I heard a saying recently, and I would love to your point on that. But someone say, 20 years ago, if you were not crawled by Google, you were not existing on the web. If Google is not crawling you with robot.txt, your website is not into the search engine results, so you don't exist, right? On marketing level, right? So he was asking, if your data is not into LLMs, in the next month, you may not exist in the answers of the LLM, right? You may not exist in the answers.
Yeah, a similar story, isn't it?
And if like 100 million users in a few months, I don't know when they will reach 1 billion, but if you're whatever ticketing, flight ticketing, whatever API and then service, or if your hotel booking service, or if you don't exist into all these LLMs, you may not be you may lose this channel for your business. So this is why of course I don't think we can recommend people to go there or not. It's their own business decision. But yes, this is what's the challenge. Do you feel the same?
I'm not sure yet. I think it's still early days for that, but certainly does seem as if you need to have a presence on ChatGPT to be visible in the world. It's not just Google anymore. That part for sure seems to have changed completely. In terms of exactly what does it mean for every business, I'm not sure yet.
Perfect, Eric. We just reached the 40 minutes we had together. Really thank you. So we can follow your work at CTO of Intellyx, but also at editor as the news at the news stack, right?
Absolutely. I'll be publishing more articles about APIs and other trends, and you can always find me on LinkedIn and Twitter as well.
Perfect, Eric. It was great to have you. Thank you for your insights and from all your experience on the topic and your overview that young, let's say, technical leaders or business leaders can't have, because if you don't have this experience, you can't have this knowledge. So thank you very much, Eric.
I got the white hair right here from all of this. But thank you so much. It's been great to be here. I love the conferences. I'm looking forward to the rest of the day's sessions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric.
Right. Thank you.
So we finished this last trend talking about LLM and API and IA. So we'll have one full track today about that. But there is a sixth trend we did not mention especially, which is the sustainability aspect, the environmental aspect. And this is why we're glad to have Yannick Tremblais joining us to talk about the API Green Score. Hello, Yannick. How are you?
Hello, Mehdi. Thanks, and you?
I'm doing really great. Thank you very much. So it's true that you made an announcement, I think, last year about the API Green Score. You've done great work about thinking sustainability for your APIs and how to pilot that. This is why we really wanted to have you to explain what you have done and what it is and how can people join.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly the subject. So thanks for this stage. And so we'll start, we'll go deep dive in the API, numériquement responsable in French, and digital API responsibility. Thanks for the board to allow me this slot. So first, a few words about me. I'm Yannick Tremblais. I was responsible for the API platforms. And now I'm driving IT innovation topics for the Groupe Rocher, and I'm involved for the CSR initiative, particularly in the responsible for the digital practices. Groupe Rocher is for business sector for cosmetics with Yves Rocher and Arbonne, clothing, Petit Bateau, cares with Stanum and well-being. And we are presently near in 120 countries. Groupe Rocher adopted in 2019 the status of mission-driven company. Our mission is reconnect people to nature. So this mission-driven company allows commercial companies, should they wish to do so, to formally pursue one or more social environmental objective. And it's a part of our activity. So this concerns any mission of collective and general interest, for example, the protection of the environment, or the context of a local establishment. And this reason that is deeply rooted in our company's products, services, and experience, using the benefits of the nature to deliver well-being. But what is the objective of the link with the IT? So this missions, reconnect people to nature, is involved in 4 pillars for the Groupe Rocher technology solutions, the ICT teams. These pillars is green IT, how to reduce the carbon footprint of main CO2 emission sources, eco-design for our information system, so make sure that new technology and data were introduced are mostly productively and wisely. And we are talking API Green Score on this pillar. Responsible IT usage, so raise awareness for the Groupe Rocher employees about digital sobriety, support Groupe Rocher entities to integrate digital sobriety in their CSR, their corporate social responsibility policies. And the last one, IT for green, put digitizations at the service Groupe Rocher ecological transitions. In 2021, at the beginning of this talk, Mehdi talked about that, we participated to the Digital Challenge apidays. It was the second year they did that. And we won 2 prizes with two different teams. One for the hybrid integration platform, which includes the API platform, and the other one for the reasonable usage of data. It was a good challenge, very interesting. And following this challenge, I decided to join a collective in France to continue working about the eco-design for the APIs. This collective names API Thinking. It's more than 100 members company, French company, European company, and 180 active members. And we joined together to organize meetup, workshop, and provide some guide or grid like API Green Score. This French company is around different activity domain like bank, retailer, cosmetics, energy, insurance, travel, government. I stopped here. And they worked about governance, API governance, security, sustainability, ecosystem for the API. So what we discover in this and what we exchange during this collective, you are a lot of tools to measure your website, to measure your backend consumptions and carbon footprint impact, and some things about infrastructure, but nothing around how to evaluate the API. And with Julia Bra from L'Oréal, we decided to join forces in service of community because we are pioneer of API eco-design. And environmental impact is a shared concern. So with the collective API thinking, we worked in 2022 to create a guideline to produce some best practice, evident best practice sometimes, and provide a grid to calculate the evaluations of your API. And other companies have joined us, like transport, bank, insurance, and energy for this work group. And like said Mehdi at the beginning, we provide in December for the apidays Paris, the first delivery of our toolbox. It's just the beginning of the story. But before going deep dive for the API Green Score, some few words about key figure. Digital world is not immaterial, quite the contrary. It consists of computer, screens, smartphones, millions of kilometers of copper and fiber optical cables, and thousands of data centers and billions of phone chargers, and so on. And digital technology generally divides in 3 tiers: users, data centers, and network to connect users and each other and the data centers. ADEME, the French Environmental Agency, and ARCEP, the French agency in charge of regulation for communication, they provide, in last March, a report with, they share some figures. The QR code gives you the link to this report. It's in English, and we've got one in French. And the most important tiers for the digital carbon is the device. This is the most important part for the device during the production of them. And in this report, they said without actions to limit the growth of the environmental impact of the digital technology, the carbon footprint could be tripled between 2022 and 2050. Individually, the equipment reduces their energy consumptions. If you take the 5G for the cellular, for the fiber, they consume less energy, but the usage increase. On 5G, you can watch easily a full video on 5K or 8K. And this report says we've got a lot of change about digital usage with the cloud gaming, with data, with AI. We just talked about ChatGPT, with robots, with Quantic, and we've got a lot of evolutions on the data center. For each of the game changer, APIs are often of the core of these components. I invite you to read this report. It's very interesting to have another overview. So now we can talk about API Green Score. What is it? It's a toolbox, a toolkit to assist in using the principle and advice. It's not evaluation grid like electronic equipment or vehicle. We use the same way, the same design, but it's not to compare company each other. It's more for your company, for your startup, for your education team. And we are indeed discussing about eco-design and eco-consumptions. So some rules can be adapted to your context. And if you are not agree with some rules, you can remove them. This decision was made to work on 7 domains to find the mindful metrics usable for the stakeholder. And there is also a focus of the technological aspect and the accessibility. It's also to be addressed. We don't start it, but we know it's important to have the impact for the social impact also. So we produce a grid to evaluate that, but it's very important to share the calculation rules with all API personas. API personas, what means own API owners, API consumers, and API developers. So users and developers. And there is no judgment on the quality of the deliverable. It's clearly a continuous improvement process. So if I give you some information about the domain, the objective is to have a focus of different subjects and help people to understand what is the goals for the roles at the end. So in the different domain, we can have the API lifecycle. I will give you more detail just the slide after. We're talking about the referentials of your API. We are talking about data exchange, information about the data also. It's a little bit different, but we've got some rules which talk on the data exchange and data. The architecture. And another domain is tools, infrastructure, and communications. I will give you more detail for the first one, but if you need more information, we can share at the end of this talk the support. And the communications, the most important, the reasons that I talk here today, because without any communication and without any support to explain that, it's very difficult to involve people. So if we go deep dive for the API lifecycle, each time we create a global card. And we said, what is the objective for this card? What is the description? So for the API lifecycle, we are talking about the consumer referentials. Who used the API, how many people, how many calls we've got by day, what is the release numbers, the versions of the API you've got. And if you've got an API gateway and an API portal, it's more useful to have that. But we can start with a simple Excel sheet or Google Sheet file. For the governance, for the API lifecycle, it's more for the API product owner, or if you've got it, a center of expertise for the API, COE. And how we can evaluate that, how we call at the end of the presentations about the logs. The objective is to share information with all personnel, with all people. You've got some KPI, and when we produce KPI, we said, for example, what is the number of versions of API we've got on productions? We define the rules. It's a US 03, and we can use these rules to have more detail about, and it's used for the evaluations. And of course, we give some example because it's important for the all API personas to understand what is the objective for the API lifecycle. Another example, it's about the data exchange. We're talking about the information exchange between two systems. What is the format? What is the size? We're talking about payload exchange. What is the pattern we used? We're talking about event-driven pattern. It is in this domain, we're talking about this kind of rules. Do you use some cache system? Do you use a process to retrieve information? And we'll retrieve other steps like governance who are involved by this data exchange. So we're talking about API product owner, application owner. How we measure this impact. If you got end-to-end tool for the observability, you can use it and share information with all API personas. And what is the KPI? Here you can see some rules like cache performance systems. And the last domain I will share you to give you a global overview about it, it's the data. Have you got naming conventions to create your API and your API design schema? Have you got a modelization, a pivot format? Are you sure you've got a single source of truth for your data to avoid duplicate information, to avoid multiply the source of information and to have some false information sometimes or not up to date? And in the same way, we are talking about the data format. Which data format do you use? It's important to have reflections about that and just use a format linked to your habits. If you already do XML and you always use XML, perhaps is it the best way to use your API? It's not for a battle. I don't want to go in this path. Okay, I'll talk about 7 domains, but it's very difficult to have rules with 7 domains. So we reduce that to 4 categories because you can probably impact some category like design, because you are a developer, you produce your API, or you are users and you want to have a specific API so you can influence the design. And you can air it, you can don't change the architecture. We've got 1 point concerning the usage and last for the logs. A little bit tricky, 7 domains, 4 categories. So it's more important to understand the way we need to produce this API grid code at the end and how we are focused to facilitate the understanding of this task. And at the end, we've got a rules. So just before I talking about US 01, that means usage 01 rules, and you've got a usage 02 rules. And each time it's very simple. It's true or false for the rules. And sometimes for some specific rules, we're talking about rate. For example, the number of users, consumer of your API. If you produce one API for each users, you can probably have many users for one API. So we are talking about a rate for this one. And if some rules is not relevant for you, you never use GraphQL, you never use event-driven architecture, you can remove these rules. But the most important thing is share these rules and explicit these rules with the person, all personnel. I insist about that. And you've got a grid, a big grid. No, not so big, but you retrieve the different category to help people to understand. And you've got an evaluation note at the end, and it helps you to improve your API. And if you evaluate the first time and you are the E note, it's not so important. It's not important. It just helps you to how you can improve it. And sometimes you've got many verbs in the same API, depending on your architecture. So don't go in deep dive for each role. Take the most important roles. If you've got get, post, patch, if you've got many gates, go for the evaluation for the gate part. So if I give you more details about the domain and the rules, for example, for the architecture, we've got AR05. This is the first rule. Have you got a carbon footprint dashboard? Some cloud provider give you some information like Google or Microsoft, for example, Azure, and you give you some information to evaluate your impact for your API platform. It's involved more the API producer for this side, and what is impact? It's more for the network and compute. So each time for each rules, we explain the different steps and we give you some details to understand. But it's not enough. You've got the theoretical part. I give you more detailed example. So I explain you've got a dashboard for Microsoft Azure, another one for GCP, but GCP is not enough. You've got a global overview for your project. And what we need is to understand the link between your personal project for the API, for example. We've got a dedicated project inside, and we need to understand what is the impact for the compute, for the network. And we produce with the Groupe Rocher a board with a data studio named Looker now to understand well what's the impact of our system. Here, it's the platform for production for the API platform on APGX. And we've got only the network part for this one because Google hosts the runtime. And when we discover to have this kind of report, we discover that everything normally should run in Europe, in Belgium or Holland. And what we discover is that we've got huge consumptions and huge CO2 emissions until August last year. And that it was just due to one component, a global component, which ran in US. And for the beginning of our project, it was not necessary to be in US, but the carbon footprint was bad due to this component. So we adapt it, and we are able to reduce the impact. It's so important for this one, but it can help you, and it's important to have this kind of report. It's not enough for today because we haven't the runtime visibility on APGX, and it should be probably the next step with the discussion with Google. My second point concerns the data exchange. I take care about the time. The data exchange, it's important to evaluate. I talk about the format, if it's JSON, XML. I don't go to the battle between the two formats, but thinking about how to produce API and how to produce a payload. If I give you a short example, you can see a little bit byte between XML and JSON. It's not so important for this part. It's small byte. But if you're thinking about volume, with one day with 2 million calls per day for this one, it's 0.17 gigabyte for the volume. And if you're thinking about 1 month with 30 days, it's 5.25 gigabytes per month. So thinking volume when you are trying to share information between systems, when you are produce your data, your payload of your applications. And zip XML, it's not so important for this one. It's only 4%. So thinking that when you produce API. The last one, the other one, it's a mix between two domains, data and data exchange. And it's a category for the design. So we've got 3 rules. And the important point is using cache, how to implement that, especially if you got an API gateway, it's very easy to do that today. I give you an example. We've got 700 shops in France for Yves Rocher. We've got information for the opening and closing hour, and which kind of facility we've got in this shop. This information don't change every day, and probably we can take a few days to have the same information. So we can implement easily a cache system to provide information and to avoid some compute in my backend and the network exchange between my API gateway and my backend. And of course, it's involved the API producers, but for the consumers, it's important to have this information on the contract to say, take care and be careful. Sometimes the information can be cached. And what L'Oréal provide, they provide a board which gives some details about the caching performance. You got information about latency, about availability of the API services, but of course have information about the caching performance. It's important to involve the users about that. Another point concerning the data exchange, use query parameters in your API. It can simplify or reduce the size of your payload and avoid to retrieve a lot of information in case of probably it's not necessary. If I use a small example with it allow me to retrieve information of postal address, and if I give you only 10 avenue, I can retrieve by default only 5 results, and my payload is very small. If I don't implement that, I can retrieve 100 results. And you can see if I've got a lot of calls per day on this platform, you increase the volume with it's not necessary. And don't forget to manage the limits of your payload and give a feedback to your API consumer by this kind of best practice. And another one for Spotify, use paginations. If you want to limit the offset of the call, you can implement this kind of tools to reduce and say, I want only the 50 first result, or I want only the 20 last one, 18 in this case. And my last example concerns the logs. We catch a lot of information on the logs. Each time we've got a call, we are able to retrieve information. So we use a platform to do that. We use Elastic Platform. And it's important to identify this point at the beginning of your project. You can do that after when you're on production, but it's important to understand what's happened. But use an example to explain more better. For Rocher, we've got many brands and many countries, so we can use the same API and the same structure. And sometimes it's able to have all information millisecond by millisecond. It's important for the support, for debugging, but one day later, it's not so important to have this kind of call. And I can aggregate informations and reduce the size of my storage, reduce the size of my request when I retrieve informations. Of course, I lose information, but it's not so important. For example, here I've got a rules to average the global response time. Thinking of the byte each time you produce this kind of tools, you use this kind of tools. And here we save a lot of disk. For example, we save 4 GB per month, and it can increase very quickly. And with the tools like Elastic, I don't want to promote Elastic. Probably we can do that with Datadog or other tool, but Elastic, I know it well. It's very easy on your infrastructure as code to say, I want to keep only 35 days for this information. And this is the rules when I want to rotate my log or to aggregate information. And this is the rules for the global response time. It's only on average. It's enough for me today. So we don't start alone for this subject. I said at the beginning of the talk, we've got a lot of tools to help us for the front, for the backend, for the system, for the architecture, but not enough for the API. But we can inspire with an organization like the Institut du Numérique Responsable, Institute of Digital Responsibility. They provide a lot of rules, and it's also available in English, to help people to design system for the UX, UI, and some for the architecture, and promote some kind of architecture, like event-driven, for example, architecture. It can help you. Another source is the Green Software Foundations. The Green Software Foundations join the Linux Foundations, and they provide some information concerning the pattern to help people for the integration pattern, to find the good way or the better way to reduce impact, and for example, for the single source of truth of your data. The other one is CNUMER. It's a green IT collective, and they provide some tools to analyze your system, your applications, and evaluate the impact of your system for you. And the last one, it's EcoCode. I came from the DevOps part, and what is important for me is because today we produce some Excel sheet for evaluate the rules, slide to explain you the rules, but I want to go more deep dive and produce CI/CD tools to be able to evaluate more easily the information. And like you say, it's very simple to say if it's true or false. For the payload side, for example, we can evaluate quickly with a sandbox. And the Echo Code provides this kind of tool for the Sonar Cube for automations. I talk very fast, but I speak very fast, sorry, but what is important today, this is only the beginning of our journey. We delivered in last December this grid score, the best practice. My objective is to provide a GitHub source code to have some contributions all over the world for every people involved by this subject, and transform your API strategy with the industry's leading practices for environmental sustainability. Think about that. This QR code gives you a link to the API Thinking Collective and to this slide, to these presentations. And I hope you are interested by this subject. We need your help to improve that. Thanks a lot for your invitation.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Thank you for this quite thought-leading and practice leader aspect of API sustainability and environmental sustainability. We have a few questions. The first one is really about what's the most difficult, let's say, dealing with the human aspect, getting sponsors, support, getting governance, getting people aligned, or was the tech aspect, like the all what you explained, the data, the caching, the request and stuff?
Both two. The tech aspect is not difficult. Today, with an API gateway, you've got tools to enable easily cache system. Before you need to compute or to program that in your backend. Today it's very easy to do that. But you need to change the mindset of people to say, don't call each time the database to retrieve information that never change. So implement this kind of rules and take time to do that. And for the governance, it's important also to say to users, we probably have another way to communicate with the API. For example, for the API, the event-driven system, to say we can only push the change information. So the both is also difficult to do that.
So it seems sometimes it's just good practice. You just take the good practice into a sustainability movement, right? But at the end, it's just at some point what we may consider a good practice, not calling a database for data that's not changing or stuff like that. So from all what you've seen, what can be considered just good practice that we just forgot and we use sustainability for that, and versus things that were really done just for sustainability, even if it's not a good practice? Do you see?
Yes, for the log part, I think it wasn't just a good practice. We discovered that because we need to migrate to another release of the platform. And the guys who make the migration, you've got a huge volume of information. You can stay in this way. And we need to stop logging and say, yes, we need to change. So it's not a good practice. No, it's a good practice. But at the beginning, it wasn't one.
Last question for the time we have. But did you happen to have, let's say, sustainability decisions on the API side who were going against the business? So you had to convince the business that it was not good for the business, or not, at least there was a compromise to do on the business to respect sustainability goals.
Yes. For example, the data, when I said, in case of, I need 100 data to retrieve, 100 items, in case of I want to evaluate I want to change my mobile app. And we need to say, no, don't do that. Use only the data you need today. And we change the value, we change the mobile app to include new value. So it's not only on Groupe Rocher, it's probably on the insurance and bank. And we need to say that, but this is an important point to say that is impact. And when we're talking about payload, nobody knows what is payload. Only API developer knows that. It's a job, but we need to explain what is impact for users also.
But when you take the example of shops, opening hours of shops, and that you may cache this because it doesn't move, but you may have some users, some customers who, at really sometimes, but that may if the data is changing because of whatever national holiday or stuff like that, they may miss the fact that the shop was open or not. So then this sustainability decision, these caching decisions may have business impact, right?
Yes, of course. So
yeah.
you need to be clear on the contract to say, hey, take care, this data could be cached, and we need to have a discussion with API users about that. And we probably change the rules during the time, but to avoid a call to the database each time you've got an API call, and to have only 1 or 2 updates per day, it can be enough sometimes.
It totally makes sense. So let's think more, let's say sustainability. Let's think more smartly, and especially because after your talk, we will have a track on AI, LLMs who consume a lot of resources. So let's try to make the best of both worlds. Thank you very much, Yannick, for being with us. And again, the API Green Score. And if you share your slides on whatever, Twitter or whatever, your QR code, you will be able to get to know the API Green Score and the slide deck presentation. Thank you very much, Yannick.
Thanks a lot, Mehdi. Have a nice day.
Have a good day. And so we'll go for a 25-minute break, and we will be back in 25 minutes in the 3 different tracks: the LLM, AI, and API track, the new API stack track, more the architecture and technical talks, and the API security tracks by our partner API Sec University. So let's see each other at 10:45 Eastern time, 4:45 Central time, and 10:45 p.m. Singapore time. See you in 25 minutes.